So look, you know, I listened to some of the rhetoric that's centered around this notion of motherhood, and much of it, what I hear, and it could just be who I'm around in my collection of experiences. Sorry, I'm trying to merge and do my thing here. I think a lot of it has to do with what I hear from women, right? So, like, men really shouldn't be talking about motherhood because they have no dog in a fight regarding motherhood. They have a dog in a fight regarding fatherhood, right? But I listen to women who like to tell you, oh, let me rephrase that. I hear women speak incredibly negative about motherhood. And this is what I would say. I really think women who have never been mothers and no intention on being a mother shouldn't speak on motherhood. I find it interesting that they think because maybe they had a bad experience growing up as maybe an older sibling having to watch children or something like that, right? That's still not the same thing as motherhood. That is increased responsibility, but it's not motherhood. I want to make it clear. I think when you have women who have been traumatized in some sort of way speak on motherhood and they've never been mothers, I think it's it's setting a bad precedent. It's kind of like when people talk about marriage and they've never been married, but they want to tell you what it's like being married. And I constantly have to tell people proximity to something is not the same thing. That's like saying you have proximity to whiteness. It's not the same thing. You don't have a white experience. Having proximity to motherhood is not the same thing. You don't have a motherhood experience. Same thing about being married. You don't have a marriage experience. I want to make it clear. I listen to women talk about motherhood and say what it is and what it isn't. I'm like, until you walk that experience, you can't speak on anything. You have proximity, you don't have the experience. When you are responsible for the caring, feeding, everything else, because see, the thing is, people think because they are like a super auntie or a family friend or something like that, that, well, I know what it's like. I'm like, you literally do not. Kind of like people with pets, they think it's the same thing as having a child. I'm like, it is not. It is not. And if you're trying to do it right and you're trying to prepare um, for an inheritance and create a legacy for your offspring, it is not the same. So when people say, well, I have a pet, it's like having a child, I'm like, it literally is not. You know what my favorite thing was? When people saw that I had twins, they're like, oh, I have Irish twins, so it's like having twins. I'm like, it's literally not. It is not like having twins. And people who have been down that road of having twins, they're like, I wish these people would shut up because it is not the same. Until you live that, you can only maybe empathize. You can get kind of maybe close or maybe replicate, but it is not the same. When you are a mother, and let me say for the record, I don't want to sit here and proclaim that all parts of motherhood are great. Some women enjoy motherhood more than others. For example, I have a child right now who's going to miss school for the second day because he has a stomach bug. My husband and I, we have a deal. I don't do I don't do throw up. No, I absolutely do not. I'm like, nope. I can do poop and pee and that type of thing, especially when they were younger. Not that I enjoyed it, but I can handle that. I cannot handle throw up. I'm like, so when my kids are like, Mom, I'm like, look, I am not that kind of mom. I'm like, either daddy has to help clean that up or you need to go ahead and clean it up yourself. It's time to toughen up, buttercup. What I'm saying is, no, I don't enjoy all aspects of motherhood. I don't enjoy having to lean in on one child when they act like they don't want to school. I'm like, you build schools. You need to be schooling, right? What I mean by that is when they decide, like, oh, I'm just not going to hand in my work. I'm like, oh, you're going to hand in your work. We're going to hand in work. I don't enjoy when you have to assess the needs of each child. Every child is different. So what I can do for one child is completely different for the next child. Some children are more needier than others. Some kids I had to lean in super hard. Some kids I'm just kind of like, I just tell them one time. I don't enjoy all aspects of motherhood of when you know you are exhausted, but you still got to come home and make sure that your children's work is done, and you're running to sports events, and then you got to make sure dinner is done. And by the way, their father does it too because there's four of them, right? So depending on what our schedule looks like, someone is taking on more burden than the other. I don't enjoy all aspects of motherhood. I don't like having to go into, my boy's room. I'm like, why does it look like this? Cleanliness is next to godliness. I'm like, my room, because I'm like, this is not your room, this is my room. My room needs to be clean. Motherhood requires you to dedicate, to provide, to um, there's a word I'm looking for, and I can't find the right word. Motherhood requires you to give a lot of yourself. It really, really does. And so when women are talking about, like, I know what it's like to be a mother, I'm like, you do not. Unless you have financially provided for every single day, a roof, health care, food, uh, etc. Unless you have provided all of the emotional support, the educational support, you have used your resources, your time, your body, and everything towards that child. You do not know. Increased responsibility does not equate to motherhood. So you may have been abused as far as maybe your childhood may have been stunted if you've had to help raise children, but you still were not the mother. And not only that, motherhood is what you make of it. I could easily back down with how much support I'm providing for my children as far as their opportunities, and my life could be a lot easier. But my job is to make sure that my children are exposed, that they're fed, that they are loved, that they are engaged, that they're educated, that they're spiritually sound, that they are affirmed, etc., etc., etc. That requires a whole lot. People who, or women in particular, who talk about motherhood, I'm like, if you've never been a mother, you don't need to speak on it. You don't need to speak on it. You can say, I don't want to be one, and that's totally okay. I want to make it clear. And we need to stop demonizing women for saying they don't want to have children. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If anything, people need to examine the reasons why women are like opting out of having children. Okay? But there's nothing wrong with it. And people want to say, oh, you're selfish. I'm like, men are selfish. I'm like, women are taking control of their bodies and of their time. And what they're saying is, I want to dedicate my time, my resources, my body, or whatever, to the caring and feeding of myself. And that has to be okay. And it doesn't mean that these are bad people. Okay? But I just want to just circle back. Women who have never been mothers need to stop talking about motherhood. They need to stop talking about it. It's just like people who have never been married. They need to stop talking about it. You having proximity to a jacked up marriage does not mean your marriage is going to be like that. It doesn't mean your marriage is going to be that way. Let me tell you something. I have learned a lot as I've gotten older in my role as a wife and as a mother. Things that I thought I knew, I thought I was certain until I started walking it. To understand what real compassion is like, to understand what real there's a word on the tip of my tongue that I'm looking for. It's not compassion. It's when you're giving of yourself, but there's something I'm looking for. There's a word that I'm searching for. I definitely, I just feel like when I actually started walking in those roles, I learned more about myself. I learned more about compromise and giving. I learned more about what is unconditional love. The things that I thought about children, and I never even wanted to have a whole bunch of children. I barely wanted one. I was like, yeah, I just want to live my life. And then when I have my own, that's not to say that people cannot be mothers to children that they didn't actually birth. What I'm saying is when I have my children, when I was responsible for my children, it was definitely, I was like, I started having these aha moments. It's like, let me tell you something. You start thinking about how protective you can become, how intentional you'll become. You start thinking about how you're going to plan for things, and you see things differently around you. You see the world in a completely different way. But I want to circle back to this before I end this live. People who have proximity to motherhood, that is not the same thing. And so women who have never had children or intend to have children need to stop speaking on motherhood. It is not the same. I don't care how much you think it is. If you think because you had a tough childhood and you grew up and you had to help watch these children, if you were not caring and feeding in all aspects, okay, because it wasn't like you were responsible for putting a roof over their head. You weren't responsible for any of those things, the health care, the roof, the food, the education, all that good stuff. And I'm not talking about those edge cases of some child who's had to do all those things. I'm talking about just because you had increased responsibility and you didn't like it and you saw things you didn't like, doesn't mean you know motherhood. You saw a bad experience. You saw something that you didn't like in your proximity to motherhood. Now, y'all can go ahead and be mad, but I just want to make sure I made it clear. It is not the same. And everyone's collection of experiences are going to be different. Okay? That's like, there's no different than people who are claiming to be, they understand what marriage is all about, never been married. You don't know. Talk to me when you've experienced it. Okay. Let me know. All right.